We will call this special council meeting to order. We acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of the First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples, and of the Huron-Wendat peoples. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and of all the original peoples of Turtle Island who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. Welcome, everybody. We have Councillor Mady sending his regrets. And are there any declarations of conflicts of interest from members of council here tonight? Seeing none, I need a mover and a seconder for the special council meeting agenda for April 2nd. Moved by Councillor Allard, supported by Deputy Mayor Shepley. Any questions? All in favor? And we will move on to public presentations, community risk assessment, and our fire master plan, presented by Terry Jervis, Vice President of Government Services Division, and Chris Burke, Fire and Safety Specialist. Welcome.
Get the mic on, thank you. Is that better? So thank you, Mayor. My colleague Terry Gervais just logged on to the evening with us. So we will be presenting both the community risk assessment and the fire master plan to council today. It's on the agenda for three things, basically the two that I just mentioned, and then at the conclusion, any questions or comments to review at the end of the session. So without any further ado, I'll start with the community risk assessment. So that was conducted in accordance with the Ontario regulations that came into effect July 2019, which basically stipulate that all municipalities will comply and have a community risk assessment completed on or by July 1st, 2024. So we're in compliance with that. The CRA, as we know, identifies and examines the threats a community is most likely to face. And so we had a team down here for a number of visits with both the gentleman to my left to review and identify the risks, the fire service perspective, and the various hazard identifications and risk analysis that we looked at for emergency management programs. And I'm recognizing a few people in the room that I saw when we ran an emergency management exercise at the fire hall, which I thought was very successful and a good learning opportunity. So the CRA will provide information that the municipalities can use to make those decisions about fire protection. Next slide. So the community profiles that we looked at, basically 9 areas of key concern, which are on the screen. The geographic, the building stock, critical infrastructure, you can read them all there, all the way down to past loss and event history profile. What is the reason for this? Is to identify the risks that municipality understand, what's most likely to occur in your municipality, and what have serious consequences in that context. Next slide. So we determined the risk factor for those consequences into 2 basic levels. A likelihood level, which spans from rare all the way down to almost certain. And the consequences being insignificant to catastrophic. And I know in one of my visits here, when we were doing the fire master plan, it was a major event, I would have called it. It was the tornado that we got stuck in the middle of, and we lost power for a few days. So I'm sure everybody in the room experienced that. So the consequence level in that context was major or catastrophic. And so this is why we determine these kind of factors. The matrix that we like to use is the same thing, everything from an almost certain to rare, and going across from insignificant to catastrophic as identified. When we looked at all the data for the town of Essex specifically, we looked at the high risk all the way down to moderate risk. And most of the events that took place in Essex were what we considered moderate risk. And they run from fire and residential occupancies all the way down to fire and assembly occupancies, motor vehicle highway accidents, fires and explosions in industrial complexes, and a severe weather event, certainly the high risk one that we experienced both then and potentially in the future. So we come up with risk treatment plans are developed to identify the risk, which helps fire services to identify and approach them on an evidence-based process and consider the outcomes and the actions and what we need to do to identify that risk assessment. Finally, the risk treatment plan may recommend training for the fire service, service delivery agreements, resource allocation, and service level changes. So all of those factors come into play with the fire service to ensure that we're meeting the proper allocation for risk treatment plans. Each risk treatment plan developed for the town of Essex recommends at least one of the following, and the following 5 are: we avoid it, we mitigate it, we accept it, transfer it, or share. And after reviewing each one of them, the fire service or the fire department should implement programs and services accordingly that were identified within the document itself. Top 5 safety risks that we identified for the town of Essex included a severe weather event. So the risk treatment plan would be to continue providing public education about the importance of emergency preparedness, including things, what we do before, during, and after most emergencies. And when we ran the emergency operation in the fire department last year, I think everybody who participated that understood the exact impact of the risk treatment plan. What the resources would be required would be to implement this risk treatment plan for the departments and resources and prepare and distribute public information, such as flyers or handouts, 72-hour emergency kits, what we do, will require numerous resources. The timeline: incorporate this strategy into your risk treatment plan in regular operations, which is effectively being done at this point with Essex Fire Services. Similarly, fire and residential occupancies conduct regular inspections, which are being done on a regular basis from both the fire master plan and the community risk assessment that we did a lot of data research with the department indicates that they are doing a lot of residential occupancies inspections in Essex, multi-unit dwellings. Continue, I say this strongly, continue to do what you're doing and deliver fire safety messages, which the department was doing by attending community events and relaying that information throughout the various news outlets, social media, and other avenues that we can get information across to individuals. Implementing this plan would require a department to allocate an adequate amount of time and resources to ongoing public education, and I'll deal with that a little bit in the fire master plan as well. The timeline for residential occupancies would be the department incorporating the strategy into regular operation, daily operations. And from our perspective with the Lumex Group, we certainly have seen a lot of regular incorporation into public education, information getting out to the public through various sources. Vulnerable occupancies, obviously another key concern. Continue implementing those annual inspections for vulnerable communities that were identified in the document. Ensure that they have current fire safety plans in place. And I can verify the fact that staff works very hard in vulnerable occupancies to understand their fire safety and emergency response obligations, working with individuals in the community. The resources, obviously, to implement this plan would require the department to allocate sufficient amount of time and resources to ongoing public education, and I'll deal with that again under the fire master plan a little bit. Road highway incidents is risk number 4 that was identified, and similarly, the department ensure that its personnel receive the training about responding to those type of incidents, which again, we also identified in the fire master plan, especially those that involve new technologies, new electric vehicles, challenging things to deal with, almost impossible to put out, but certainly being able to mitigate these types of situations comes all down to training and information provided to boots on the ground to ensure that they can mitigate those issues on an ongoing basis. And number 5 is fire explosions in industrial occupancies, still a little bit lower, but we wanted to ensure that the department has the time and the resources to inspect those industrial occupancies and complete pre-incident planning for the process of industrial accidents. And the pre-incident planning is certainly a high priority for the fire service to ensure that we're not putting lives at risk, that the boots on the ground that are dealing with these type of emergency have a good sense of what the pre-plan is for that facility, and to ensure that fire safety plans are data specific for those buildings so that they know what they're getting involved in. Implementing this plan would require departments' time and resources, and we've said this through all of them, but it continues to be that concern, is that we need to be able to ensure that the department can deliver those resources, which is all about prevention, which is all about ensuring that we don't have to respond to too many industrial occupancies because they've already dealt with it on a preventative basis. But again, it takes a significant amount of time from the fire services mandate to ensure that that's being done. Next steps, well, the CRA was used to assist in the development of the fire master plan, as I spoke to, and I'll touch on some of those points when I get to that. It's important to review and update the CRA annually, to stay on top of it, to ensure that you have a risk treatment plan for all of the major incidents that face any municipality, and develop a process as we move along to ensure that we're collecting data and information through the records management system with the fire service to be current on your community risk assessment. And then use this document and future inspections to develop future strategic planning for the town of Essex. I can do one of two things. If you have any questions on community risk assessment, we can speak to them now, or I can go through this and we can do it all at the end.
Sure. I think we'll take questions now if there's any questions from members of council. I do personally have one, and this may be more for our local staff because I just thought of it. Does the fire department have an inspection role at the local landfill? And is that on our radar? You know, if a fire happens there, you know, if a fire does happen there, which I think it has, it's a lot of toxic chemicals that are going off. So are we just there as to put it out, or do we have an inspection role there as well, please? Thank you.
Bonnie, actually, we do have an inspection plan there. We did visit there last month and did a thorough inspection and a review of the site. So basically, anytime there's a fire, you have to look at air monitoring, right? The Ministry of Environment, what's on fire. We're fortunate enough, because obviously there's some things there that obviously don't burn very clean and very nice. So we do we have had fires there, but fortunate enough for us, they were put out in very reasonable time where it didn't affect the environment. But we have been working with the County of Essex in the landfill to do rural inspections there and thorough inspections of the facility.
Councilor Verbeek.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. I'm not sure if this is for our chief or for our CAO. A few years back when we were working on the climate adaptation plan, we talked about the importance of forming a vulnerable persons registry for specifically seniors or vulnerable individuals living out in the community, especially the rural community, in case of an emergency, so that we had the ability to, you know, when the dust settled, check in on them and their well-being. And I just wondered if fire kept one of those, or if we've started to work on one as a town.
You, Mayor Bondi. We do not have anything in place, and with our recent storms we had in 2023, the 3 major storms, I know that was a concern by residents. Unfortunately, it also comes down to staff resources to be able to do that. I know it's we always will call, and fire especially will always step up if needed, but a lot of times they're out doing other emergencies. So to do that, we just don't have the resources at this time. We haven't started any registry for that.
Take us off a track, but perhaps we could do that on a voluntary basis moving forward and look at a way to start one in the near future.
And the second part of the presentation deals with the fire master plan. The fire master plan is basically ensuring that the community is compliant with the FPPA, the Fire Prevention and Protection Act, and other legislation that affects your municipality. The plan itself is to provide a clear picture of the community's current and anticipated fire protection needs. And it recommends, and I'll get into the number of recommendations we came up with at the introduction here, recommends strategies to protect the lives and the property and public education, code enforcement, and suppression service that are all affected as a result of this fire master plan. So it also provides a guide, administrative guide, operational guide, and budgetary. You'll see a little later on when I get into it, when we talk, there were 24 recommendations that we made within the fire master plan. But they all come down to whether it's mandatory, whether it requires council approval, whether it has a budget impact, and what's the term? Was it short-term, medium-term, or long-term? So from a council perspective and from a fire service perspective, as we go through the fire master plan, it's a couple of things. When you see the recommendation that I put up on the screen, please note the 4 areas of concern, and those 4 areas, again, as I say, would be is it mandatory to complete this from a legislative point of view? Does it need council approval? Is there a budgetary impact, obviously, which will impact discussions with council and the fire service? And what's the term of the recommendation? So a fire master plan typically is a 5 to 10 year document. After 5 years, you start to look at it a little bit more and review the status of what kind of recommendations we've acted on or the department has acted on, and then utilizing it for long-term strategic planning. And in this case, as I go through them, you'll get a sense of what we're recommending to ensure that we're providing a good strategic guide for the fire service, a good strategic guide for council. Because all of those decisions have a budgetary impact that everybody in this room has to deal with. So how did we approach this in our methodology? Some of you around this room would have seen us at various occasions during the process. We had startup meetings with a variety of different people and the stakeholders, both from senior levels all the way down to boots on the ground. We did data collection and analysis. We did direct stakeholder engagements within the fire service itself, where we had a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to a department with all of the staff, from the chief's level all the way down to boots on the grounds. And we systematically ensured that we were meeting with all the firefighters separately, with all the officers separately, so that there was an opportunity for everybody to speak freely. On top of that, we provided an anonymous survey that they could respond to if they couldn't make a specific meeting. We also did a community survey that went out to the community for responses on the various status of Essex Fire and Rescue. The data collection and analysis, full support from the fire service, from the municipality in providing as much data as possible. I know I dealt with a number of people in different departments to get data on things from hydrants supply, water supply, infrastructure services, and obviously with the chief and the deputies all the way down the line. And then we wrote a draft and reviewed the draft with people and then came up with our final draft. So as I said earlier, we ended up with 24 recommendations for council and the department to consider, and I'll go through those momentarily. There, as I said earlier, which I spoke to, the departments are either policy decisions, which are council's authority, or operational decisions, which will rest with the department directly. Each recommendation includes when should it be addressed. Well, I spoke to these already. So the 4 key areas, is it mandatory? Does it need budget approval from council? Does it have an impact? And what's the term? So the number of recommendations by subject area, and by subject area specifically in the document itself, has a number of headings throughout the entire document. So the document reflects the specific heading, like an overview of the department. There was 2 under bylaws. There was 4 stakeholder engagement. There were 2 all the way down to asset management at the end, which had 2 with fire stations and water supply having one each. So there's a variety, a quick reference guide of what the recommendation subject material was. So the overview of Essex Fire and Rescue, the first one was just stating the obvious that it's a volunteer fire department that operates out of 3 specific fire stations, and it has a complement of 54 suppression staff, which is divided by the number of individuals that you see on the chart here. And the overview recommendations that we asked about or recommended in this context was that the fire chief would prepare a report for council's consideration for approval to change the administrative assistant role from a part-time position to a full-time position. And again, just for context, as you see in the bold portion underneath, is it mandatory? No. It doesn't need council approval? Yes. And it has a budget impact. And what's the time frame? This recommendation, as we've seen in a number of fire services, is we tend to continue to lump a lot of information, data processing, and administrative work on senior officers that are out in the field, that require their resources in the field and be dealing with strategic and higher level things. A lot of this information could be processed at an administrative level. So our recommendation was to add to that position in a 0.5. It's already part-time. The second thing was the fire chief should prepare a report for consideration that recommends the hiring of full-time support firefighter after the contract for the current position ends. And I'm told that that position ends in 2026, is it? 27, roughly? We've been told, yeah. That depends on the incumbent, but so that's a long-term time frame review, and for the incumbent's position, once that individual decides to retire, that you should really consider having that as a contract position full-time. It reinforces the position that many fire services across Canada are experiencing today, and that is the lack of volunteer responders during daytime hours. And daytime hours, I'm referring to 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., where there's very few staff. Volunteers are doing their other regular duties. And so at this point, we look at the impact for 2 gentlemen to my left and another individual in the hall, where we can garner enough support to what we call an effective response force to immediately deal with something while we're waiting for volunteers to arrive. So that was the second recommendation that we made. In terms of bylaws, it's important to understand the importance of the bylaws. It's also important to ensure that the establishing and regulating bylaws which council approves and passes are current and up to date, and ensuring that all fire protection bylaws are being reviewed and assessed on an ongoing basis to ensure that they're protecting the municipality with the right services. So under the bylaw recommendations, we had 4, and that Town of Essex's ENR bylaw should implement the recommendations within the fire master plan, update the current ENR bylaw. So there will be some recommendations in here which will be approved or will be dealt with, whether it needs council approval or it doesn't. Hopefully with council approval, those would be passed, and those that don't require council approval, that the fire chief and his staff deal with anything that needs to be adjusted within the recommendations to be reflective in the ENR bylaw. Also, that the fire chief should complete annual review of the ENR bylaw to verify that it remains current with all emergency and non-emergency services the department provides. Typically, and I've seen this because I've spent quite a while with the staff here in Essex reviewing a lot of their data. And what I have seen is that when there are issues within an ENR bylaw, they're usually dealt with. Certainly for Essex, I'm pleased to report that the chief and his staff verify that they're current and they need to be updated. And when they are updated, that council needs to know what's going on and why they've been updated. So that's an ongoing thing. It's important to ensure not only for the fire service, but for the citizens and the residents, citizens, and visitors to the municipality to ensure that all of the ENR bylaws are protecting people. The fire chief should also review all fire service bylaws in the town of Essex and update them to ensure they're current and applicable, and then present the updated bylaws to council for consideration. And finally, within the ENR bylaw recommendations, they establish a schedule for reviewing all fire service bylaws on a regular basis. And some of this was a byproduct of us reading through and assessing all of the ENR bylaws and finding a few gaps that needed to be updated. And I think at our last session, we found out that there was some communication issue in terms of what was there. It seems mostly up to speed, but my messaging here is that it requires continual surveillance to ensure that the fire chief is overseeing the ENR bylaws and advising council of what needs to be done so that both parties are doing their job to ensure the safety and security of their municipality. We did stakeholder engagement sessions. So as I said earlier, spoke to it a little bit, that we did one-on-one meetings with a lot of the staff. We did an online public service with the community. We did a SWOT analysis for the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for the fire service. And it was all to collect firsthand knowledge and insights about the department and the community and what the applicable stakeholders need to do to ensure the safety and security of the municipality. So the Fire Master Plan developed a process with a short online survey to the community. It was made available to residents and businesses within Essex. 15 questions on an anonymous basis related to a number of topics. Have you had any interactions with the fire service? What's your general opinion of the fire service? Which fire protection services offered by the department are most important to you as a community resident or a business owner within the community? The survey respondents' most important services provided were in the following areas. Fire responses was a positive 9.8 out of 10 on the response score. Responses to natural disasters in the community, 9.3 out of 10. Medical responses, vehicle collisions, and fire code enforcement. 8.4 is still very high in terms of positive review. Most municipalities, when they talk to anybody about enforcement, it's usually a negative experience for the residents because it usually comes with fines or adjustments to the bylaws. But an 8.4 for the, at least those that responded to the survey, was certainly a positive outcome for us when we tabulated the results. So the recommendations within this section of the Fire Master Plan, that the fire chief should review the results of the public survey to identify ways the department can provide more value to the town of Essex residents and businesses. So have a review of the input of the data and see how you can look at that data to make things even better within the municipality, which would reflect on everybody. The second recommendation was should review the results of the SWOT analysis and determine whether the department should update operations to incorporate any of the suggestions. Now, the two subtleties between the two is that one was a public survey, the other one was in-house survey, and it dealt with mostly all of the boots on the ground, all the way up to officers and captains and chiefs. Both of them have a number of positive impacts, and some of them make some very valid suggestions on how they can improve a little bit. Under the emergency management side, obviously we know this because we did an emergency management exercise with Essex, but we must meet specific requirements to receive their annual compliance recognition under the regulations of the Civil Protection Act and the standards under 380 regs. Municipalities are responsible for fulfilling these obligations, not the fire service. It's a municipality. And I know when we did the exercise with the municipality, there was a massive turnout at the fire hall for the training exercise. And I certainly got the feeling that it was a valuable exercise conducted by the Lumex team, and the feedback that we got after was certainly positive. So those are the kind of things that are important to ensure that the municipality and the players in that side of the room, as opposed to these two gentlemen, understand their role within emergency management. On the recommendation side for emergency management, we indicated that Essex should assign an individual from outside the department to serve as a primary or alternate CEMC coordinator. Ideally, the incumbent should have a little bit of administrative background. The report itself goes into a little greater detail, but in essence, the reason we make a recommendation like this is when you get, when you get into a situation where your CEMC is the chief and the assistant or the deputy chief, you've got your two key individuals running a room that one of them requires to be looking at it from a strategic point of view out in the field to coordinate that information. So based on our experience with a suitable number of fire services across the province, the recommendation has always been the alternate CEMC should be somebody from outside the organization to assist, so that we have that opportunity to provide support on both sides. The second recommendation was that the CEMC should continue an annual emergency management training exercise for the town. It's highly beneficial in providing training and exercise to incorporating external resources to ensure all participants can practice to fulfill their assigned duties. And I think for some of you in the room here today that went to the last training exercise, you understood that that huge manual that sits on your desk in terms of that role is more than just that huge manual. You actually have to understand the internal components of the manual and how your role is guided during a major event like that. So continue to do that organizing of training exercise. On the occupational health and safety side, so we looked at joint occupational health and safety committees, personal protective equipment, or what we call bunker gear or PPE, fit testing, which is your masks that we firefighters wear to ensure their safety, firefighter health and wellness programs, and officer development programs. So all of these things incorporated sections of occupational health and safety. And our recommendations in the health and safety area, I think there are 5 that fire chief should form a committee to develop and manage a fitness program to complement the department's existing wellness program. So this is an area where it's important to ensure that the fire chief is at the helm and understands the support coming up from below from a committee perspective and what we can do to provide greater health and wellness for firefighters within this structure. The fire chief also, the wellness committee should explore possibilities of forming partnerships with local fitness facilities to provide firefighters with better access to fitness equipment and an exercise regime for their own health and benefits, which in the long run, when you look at firefighter health and safety, occupational health and safety, it's important to ensure that the fire service is doing as much as it possibly can to ensure health and safety in the workplace. And if that means exploring possibilities and forming partnerships outside, depending on the size of the department, sometimes we recommend that they should maybe have a little fitness setup within the station or outside of a station. A lot of that is predicated on whether you have proper ventilation in the facility to ensure that you're not breathing in a lot of the contaminants that typically off gas from PPE and things. And other times we recommend that given the structure of the facility, it's probably better to explore outside options. And if the municipality has any partnerships within that realm, that they can tap into that with the fire service and work as a committee in recommendation 1, work as a committee to strive to ensure that we're doing everything we possibly can for volunteer firefighters to ensure they have a health and wellness commitment from both sides. On the fire prevention side, so within the act and within the fire master plan and the community risk assessment, we talk about the 3 lines of defense, them being public education, code enforcement, and fire suppression. And you can see on here that fire suppression is number 3. You know, it's the one thing we don't want to always be at as a number 1. We want to ensure that public education and community involvement and code enforcement mitigates the amount of time we're actually doing suppression. The more prevention you do, the less suppression is required. So considerations on this was develop public education initiatives, ongoing inspections, smoke alarm and CO program, which is in place, investigations, and pre-incident planning, which I spoke to a little bit earlier. All of those involve a lot of time and effort. So our recommendation to council in this was to appoint a full-time training prevention officer who will dedicate half of their work hours to managing the department's fire prevention division. And then the officer would also perform suppression duties during daytime hours. I spoke to it a little bit earlier. It's the same philosophy that adding a body on here will do 2 things, and you'll see it a little later under the training regime. Having a full-time training prevention officer will provide support to the prevention side, the inspection side, the compliance side, and the bylaw side. At the same time, having somebody in the station to assist with ongoing training, which given the regulations in Ontario today, has a huge impact on every fire department in Ontario. It's demanding that the certification levels for volunteer firefighters are for always reaching higher. And in order to ensure that they meet those obligations for certification at various levels, it takes a lot more man hours or person hours. It takes a lot more work from a training perspective. And the issue here is that all of this is meeting compliance, but we don't always backfill it at the other end by ensuring we have enough people to get to the compliance level. Additionally, sorry, I clicked a little fast, but additionally, the idea of having that extra body refers to levels of service. By having an additional body that looks after both prevention and inspections, provides the municipality with another daytime responder that could jump into the mix when we talk about an effective response force to mitigate any calls. Certainly we have 2 gentlemen here, but having an extra body or so within the department that we can share the resources to ensure that we're starting off with an effective response force backfilled with volunteers during the daytime hours at the very least. It provides opportunities for the department to ensure that it's meeting its minimum standard to get an effective response force on scene within the appropriate regulated amount of time. When I talk about levels of services, I really divide them into 2 specific areas. So there's the core services, and you've seen all the core services that are identified in your E&R bylaw that the fire service is providing currently. And then we have specialized services, which are also listed there. Things like hazmat response, auto extrication, rope rescue, and water and ice rescue. All of these specialized services come with a legacy of additional training, additional certification to meet provincial standards, and certainly having an additional training officer / fire prevention officer fulfills 2 specific roles. The level of service recommendations that, sorry, my apologies. Nope, go back. The recommendations within service levels would be review the department's medical tiered response agreement and update it accordingly. Work with emergency services to ensure that we have a revised agreement, a strategic agreement for council's consideration and adoption after it's been reviewed by the fire service and recommendations are put forth by the fire chief. The fire chief should also keep track of all calls the department receives for advanced services. So this is a a process that allows us to ensure that we're meeting the standards outlined in the E&R bylaw and reviewing on an ongoing basis about our enhanced services and whether or not we should continue to provide enhanced services based on the number of calls, or do we need to add a different service based on the number of calls? So by tracking the calls that the chief would receive, if you have advanced services that we do not currently provide, make a report and make that consideration for approval for updating department's list of advanced or new services, or making a report that would say we no longer should be doing this type of service because we've only had 2 calls in the last year for it. And when you look at the overall scope of a fire services training regime and the requirements that are set out under the regulations under the Act for certification, which is a huge factor now. The province has gone to NFPA, national standards for training. It's just not a quick flip of the switch to say, oh, now you're qualified to do this type of emergency services. It takes a lot of man hours and person hours to ensure that the training is being conducted in a manner that meets the standards, having proctors involved to test to those standards, challenging the exams to test to those standards, and ultimately providing the right certification for the services that are provided. So keeping track of all those calls to ensure we're doing the right thing is both, from a chief's perspective, is both a strategic approach, but also a prudent approach to ensure that they're providing the right services to this municipality and not wasting hours in terms of training time and budgetary funds to provide a service that maybe is not required. So you're looking at both ends of those services. Excuse me for 1 minute. On the training side, I talked a little bit around most of it and touched on a few points, but we're talking about the training overview in terms of legislation, compliance, the types of training, and the challenges that are put forth by training challenges for time, cost, process, documentation, and then a training facility itself. With the NFPA standards that are recognized by this department and most other departments within the province, all of these factors come into play. They're all the challenges that all departments face to ensure that they're providing the right training, to ensure they're doing the right job from a health and safety perspective and compliance perspective. Under the training regime, we're recommending the chief should develop, should develop a process for having paratrainers assist with the training program. So people who are boots on the ground already in the field start to build the number of paratrainers that you have so that you're not burning out a lot of your existing staff by continually training to a high standard. You're starting to more of a collaborative approach to find out who is available to become a paratrainer and utilize those skills within your department to start building on your group of paratrainers. The fire chief should also establish a training committee to help plan and implement. So yes, it's a lot of work, but you know what? In our experience with a lot of various fire services across the province, establishing a small training community training committee within the group of firefighters in your station yields a lot of positive outcomes, that people are willing to step up. They want to help out with the process. They see where training is very positive or where it's not, where it's being given but not being utilized to that extent. And so by creating a small committee, it's a strategic approach from the fire services perspective to help build capacity and help build enough paratrainers to start meeting the demands before you get to that critical mass where you've all of a sudden hit the wall and nobody's interested in doing a lot of training anymore. Work on it through this level to ensure that people on the floor in all the fire halls in Essex understand what's required and how we can meet those obligations, and not only meet them, but get to that next level to ensure that we're ahead of the curve. Sorry, the third one is the fire chief should explore opportunities that allow officers to complete training and obtain certifications. So all three of these items, when I talk about, are they mandatory? They're not mandatory. Are they the right thing to do? Absolutely. Is it a good outcome for the fire service in Essex? Absolutely. But it takes time and effort. And I think all of these recommendations are things that we either do in a short term or immediately will benefit the fire service down the road. The outcomes will be positive and you know, some have a budgetary impact depending on what the courses are and what you have to attain for certification. But at the end of the day, you're training your entire workforce to a level that is NFPA compliant and provides more support for everybody on the floor. Pardon me. Finally, the fire chief should provide a report recommends hiring a full-time training prevention officer. This was also something that was put in the other side. So we have a half-time position for prevention, which deals with your inspections and your compliance and bylaws and your vulnerable occupancies and all of the things that need to be done on an ongoing basis. But in addition, the additional half-time position will help fill the capacity from a training perspective, as well as having another dedicated individual that is available in terms of that really critical time frame, daytime responses where volunteer firefighters, and not only in Essex, but we're seeing this province-wide, Canada-wide, where a lot of municipalities are facing challenges that they just are not getting people coming to fires, so that we ensure we have the effective response force that you're required to provide on the fire ground during daytime. It makes it very difficult, but certainly having an initial capacity to get trucks out of the station, backfilling it as we go, provides that support for the fire chief and his crews. Performance standards and operational modes. So the importance, this is partially about effective response force, the importance of response times, crew size, leadership, responding to the benchmarks that are required, post-incident review and analysis by looking at your response statistics and your deployment models. And I know they do that now. They do a lot of stuff on deployment models. They do a lot of stuff on determining what your effective response force is going to be by looking at the current data, as we did, and the last 5 years. But this type of strategic performance is important for the fire service to ensure that they're doing the right thing for the community. So we recommend that the chief continue monitoring the department's ERF, as it's termed in the fire service, effective response force, to determine whether the department needs to increase staffing levels, especially during daytime. Not here. I mean, the response force has been positive, but it needs to be monitored on an ongoing basis. I'll share that the fact that what we're seeing around the province is there's a lot of small municipalities that have gone to full-time staff Monday to Friday to ensure that the department can meet its obligations for an effective response force. This is why it's important in the recommendation for the chief to ensure they're continually watching response statistics and ensuring that they are having the resources respond during daytime hours. Typically, it's not affected as much in the off hours, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., where municipalities are struggling to meet their obligations is daytime response. And it's not a surprise. I mean, most of the volunteer firefighters in the station have other jobs, you know, and some can get away from their jobs or are allowed to come. Some are released so that they can do it. Others can't. And that's one of the challenges that this department will face, but it's important to continue to monitor that. Under the fire station recommendations, so we did a review of all the fire stations. Certainly 2 of the 3 are exceptional, but we have issues of storage, proper training rooms, washroom and shower facilities, apparatus space constraints, and new construction versus renovation. In this context, I'm referring specifically to the Harrow Station. And I don't know if you've been down there recently, but we're recommending Station 3 definitely needs to be replaced. It's outlived its size. It's cramped, it's crowded, it's not providing the type of AODA compliant regulations that speak to access to the fire station. Obviously, that's a big plan, but our recommendation was it should be located at the site on 2225 Roseboro Road. What we talked about during all our time here was the soccer field, yes, for ease of information. But it certainly, in all the sites that we looked at, it was the preferred site given its size, its utilization on the site, its parking, its access, its response grid, all of those good things make it a suitable location for a new fire hall, which could serve both the community of Harrow and assist in other areas as well. So that's the only recommendation we had on the fire stations. On water supply, we reviewed all of the, and I'll tell you just from my own personal experience dealing with infrastructure services, was it? Or I had a couple of names. Jake, did I get it right? Yeah. They were fabulous. Boy, they had a lot of data. They had everything down. So kudos to the municipality for them doing a great job, because there was a lot of data to go through, talking about municipal hydrants, talking about private hydrants, and non-hydrant protected areas. So it was an exceptionally good job. On the recommendation only was that the fire chief ensure that this department, which has had a Superior Tanker Shuttle accreditation, continues to meet that applicable fire service guidelines. And I don't know if everybody in the room understands what an accreditation for tanker shuttle means, but as for, you don't have that. Yeah. Okay. It's something to review. It's something from a residential point of view that you should consider looking into, only from the perspective of your residents. It does allow for some savings on insurance costs for home insurance and things like that. It's a challenge for any fire service to meet those obligations, but I think given your well-stocked infrastructure service of water, supply lines and private hydrants and access, it's something that you should look into for sure. It would be a positive recommendation. It could have positive impacts within the community. Asset management is, I think, the last of the recommendations of the 24. So talking about the fire apparatus considerations, ongoing fleet renewal and rationalization, and fire equipment. So there are two specific areas within the fire service. There's your fleet, and then there's everything else that you have to look after. So certainly from that perspective, the considerations are, what's your current fleet and obligations, which this department has been doing a fabulous job on from what I saw in terms of what their fleet is and their life cycle over time to meet the NFPA standards and ensure that they're still qualifying for certification and licensing. Staffing levels, apparatus licensing, and the age of vehicles for insurance and grading purposes. There's a whole matrix that we talk about within insurance and grading systems for purchasing of equipment to ensure that you can still get insurance on your equipment. So the recommendations for asset management was prepare a report, recommends continued investment in department's radio communication equipment. So that's the other half, the other equipment, not the apparatus, and should address the state of the current radio station and indicate whether the department should upgrade to fire quality radios. Right now, that's not fire quality radios. But as part of that recommendation, we said that, you know what, it would be prudent for this fire service to talk to other agencies and other, both internal or external, and look at where people are going with their radio purchases. It's an expensive proposition. And see where shared services could apply or where people would be interested in partnership to look at interoperability. Radios are a big factor. And that's it on the recommendation side, the 24, covered a lot of ground in, apologies, a very short time. The documents themselves obviously go into greater depth on a lot of these issues and guide the fire service and guide council as to where things should be headed and how best to achieve those results. So from our perspective, yeah, personally, I will say this, I generally don't make this comment, but this was a tremendous group of people to work with, both from the municipality and from the fire service. We got everything we asked for, all the data. A lot of municipalities are a little shy and reluctant to give you data because they know that they're not meeting obligations. But both from the corporate municipal side and from the fire side, the dialogue and the work that we did over the past 7 or 8 months provided us an excellent opportunity to do an assessment of the fire service. And I'd like to personally thank both the chief and Jake and all his people that were involved in the process, because it allowed us to make the recommendation and make the observations in a prudent and responsible and fiscal manner. So thank you, Council and Mayor. I'll throw it out to you.
Well done, and I'm not surprised that our staff did a great job. Our fire team is a very strong one. Questions, comments from council? Councilor Verbeek?
For you, Madam Mayor. No, nor am I, that you had such positive experience with our fire team and with our administration. There's no surprise there. I guess this is for our fire chief, about our radios and our communication equipment. The suggestion that it could be updated. Did that just happen like within the last 2 years, like year ago?
For you, Mayor Bondi, you're correct. We did have money set aside in the 2023. It was a capital project for radio system upgrades. It's held up right now with the city of Windsor. So basically, like when you look at some of the recommendations, we have to work with partnerships on external agencies. So whatever we do radio wise, we have to do with all the other neighboring municipalities. So we see consistent and operable with everyone. So they got to look at infrastructure upgrades, possibly some cell tower upgrades. So we were hoping to get it done in 2023. It's been pushed to 2024. So we're still having those ongoing conversations now to try and get it going. We're optimistic that we could get something started in 2024, but like there's still a long road ahead of us. But we are planning on going to fire grade radios.
So this report just reaffirms what you have already brought to council in the past, the need. That's
correct. Through Mayor Bondi, yeah. When we did the master fire plan, basically Lumex identifies that we don't have fire grade radios. So it gets identified as a recommendation that we need to maintain going forward, working on getting fire grade radios and upgrading our system.
Mayor Shepley, then Councilor Hammond, Councilor Guerin, Councilor McGuire, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. Couple questions on the positions recommended. I'll start with the admin position. Right now, how many hours a week is our part-time admin working? And is this something? This is a suggestion. Obviously, it's not a requirement. Just wondering what the hour frame she's working now to what you would consider it to be.
Mayor Bondi, right now our administrative assistant's part-time and she works 20 hours a week.
Thank you for that. And so my other question then is on the full-time fire prevention. This is a new position and it says to meet the minimum standard. Are we not meeting the minimum standard at this time? Is this something that we were required to do, or is this something that is this like a want?
On that, it's really divided into two perspectives. It's the training and the inspection prevention side. Are you meeting the minimum standard? Yes, you are. Can you do a more aggressive job in the community to ensure that vulnerable inspections are being done on a regular basis more promptly? Are we doing a lot of on-demand inspections and a number of other areas? At the same time, On the training side, you know, there's still a lot of work to do to upgrade our abilities to meet minimum certification and ensure that our long-term goals of having officers within the organization meet those standards for certification by the province. So between the two, we saw it as an opportunity to build up the training perspective, to support the inspection side of things. You are meeting them, but it's a supportive role. And in the same context as I outlined earlier, the fact that you're also adding a person who is daytime available for response criteria for an effective response force assisting the gentleman here.
And if I may add, Madam Mayor, through you, one of the things you should look at your prevention position is an investment. When the fire trucks go out the door, it's a very costly venture for the municipality. You can't control the cost because you don't know how long you're going to be there, what type of the incident is. What we're proposing here is take away from that minimum requirements under the Act and go to a more proactive investment. So you're doing more inspections. And as your community grows, there's going to be more and more pressure put on your current prevention as well. So we're suggesting that if you invest in the future by adding on this half prevention person, and Chris talked about the half training, what it's going to do in the long run, it's going to also help your risk to your community based on your community risk assessment, and also the risks of the fire services having to go out to a call that, you know, that's very costly. And third, but certainly not the third item, is the safety of the firefighters. So safer buildings not only help your residents get out, but it also protects your firefighters as well. So we're seeing it, the recommendation is an investment in the future.
Appreciate that. And my last question would be, what would the average wage for, like, what would the cost be to the budget at the end for next year if we were to do something like that? Do you have any idea what that would come in at roughly, or something we would look at later on, I'm assuming?
That'd be a question we'd have to deal with finance with, or Director Morissette.
Through your Mayor Bondi. So just a couple things to point out is the report is recommendations. So just because council was to receive and approve the document tonight doesn't necessarily mean we're going ahead with all of these recommendations right away. Specific things that would have budget impacts or staffing impacts would come back to council through either budget deliberations or some other means. So approving the plan tonight doesn't mean it's a stamp to just go ahead with. But in terms of the funding, there would be a staffing internal committee that does evaluations on wage rates. So it's difficult to say at this time. We'd have to figure out exactly what those duties would be and kind of go from there.
Counselor Hammond?
Yes, through you, Mayor. Thanks for the review and everything. The recommendations are just screaming at me though, money, 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 money. I'm all for investing in our fire department, but I need to have some sort of idea what we're looking at as far as prospective costs. I've counted as many as 3 new full-time employees. Am I correct in a new fire hall, new fleet, new equipment? These are all things that we need to have some sort of a number on, so we can proceed forward to get any of this to go through. I'm all for accepting the thing, but we're going to definitely need some numbers on most of these things.
Councilor Hammond, just as Director Morissette said, these are just recommendations. Anytime there is a new vehicle, a new staff member, our same process would go through budget deliberations. So this plan, we're just looking at you to adopt the plan in principle. And if any of the recommendations that have a budget constraint, they still follow our regular process. So again, you won't be approving any financial commitments tonight based on that.
Counselor Garen?
Through the chair. Yes, so talked about increased staffing levels during daytime. Was that specifically these three positions or so of administrative, or is it administrative and firefighter? I'm just trying to grab my head around the recommendations for increased staffing levels during the daytime. I was assuming that the volunteer firefighters, some can't respond, and there's a need to fill that void. Am I on the right page here?
So it's a good question. Thank you, Counselor. Two things for this. One, the administrative assistant is an administrative assistant. We recommended that you have sufficient support to provide relief for the fire chief and the deputy chief that are doing a lot of administrative duties currently, and provide that opportunity for them to be able to respond quickly and effectively, which they would do anyways, but then there becomes an excessive backlog of administrative items. The additional training training position with the fire prevention position. So it's really only the one position that would add to a daytime response, an effective response force, to provide support for the chief and the deputy at this point.
Not really so much to cover emergency or fire calls during the day. It's more for assistance because they can only be in one place at one time, so to speak. So that being said, just out of curiosity, what do we know? Because we do get calls that come through that sometimes the chief or deputy chief can go and answer themselves. And then sometimes we actually have the calls where we need the whole fire team. What is the percentage of calls we get daytime versus after hours? We're getting 100 calls a year. How many of them are actually daytime that are actual, we need an emergency and fire crew versus after hour?
Madam Mayor, currently I don't have those numbers on what calls are during the day and which calls are in the evening. But during the day, I can say we average staff anywhere from 6 to 8 normally per station during the day, depending on availability. After hours, we're pretty good shape after hours. We have a lot of people that work day shifts, but I can look at getting you those numbers, basically how many responses we have during daytime hours, 6 to 6, and how many we have from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
For curiosity, I was just trying to figure out how many are the urgency and during the daytime hours where we are suspect with being able to have firefighters respond to versus how many are the administrative end and so forth.
Madam Mayor, normally during the day, the ones that myself and Deputy Brockman are normally open burning complaints that we attend. Basically calls to the office, not from dispatch. So we'll go and investigate the open burn, and then if we determine that the crew's got to attend and extinguish the fire, then we dispatch them, but it happens very rarely.
Okay, so further that through the chair. So our current staffing levels we have at all three stations in terms of volunteer firefighters is adequate.
Volunteer firefighters, I would say, is adequate. Yeah, 21 at each station, 16 firefighters, 4 captains, 1 district chief. Currently, as you know, we're short right now. We're hiring 12, but we have 21 at each station at full complement.
Thanks through the chair. I have to agree with everybody here, and I might be a little biased, but we have the best fire department in the county. So the recommendation, and again, you can see the issue, we're bringing it up 1, 2, 3 times, is the addition of all these extra full-time positions. Would it make sense if your the current part-time admin was an actual firefighter? So when there was a firefighter during the day, they could assist. I mean, you're only getting 1.07 calls a day. So that's roughly, let's say, 3 hours. If it's a good call, you're 3 hours out in an admin's day. So moving them from a part-time to a full-time, and then making sure that they are could be a volunteer firefighter, they could then assist during the day. And would that relieve a full-time position?
If I understand your question correctly, the message here is that your full-time administrator is an administrator of the department to assist the chief and the deputy in compliance with all of the paperwork that needs to be completed from ministry obligations. If you had a full-time position as an administrator who was also a firefighter, yes, that certainly would assist. But at the end of the day, you're still taking from the position that needs a lot of work to be completed. And we saw that position as something that needed to be staffed on a full-time basis to ensure that the rest of the fire service is completing their obligations on a day-to-day basis rather than getting tied up with a lot of administrative duties.
And I just, you're asking, sorry, I'll let Director Morsuit say something.
Mayor Bondi, so one other thing to also keep in mind is the current administrative position over there is a unionized position, so we would have to work in terms of unionized stuff if something was to change, which may or may not be possible. So it's not simply just taking that recommendation or what your question is. We would have to work through those channels as well.
Thank you. Through the chair. So I was just confused. You said there's a role that expires in 2027-ish. What role is that? Is that the assistant to the deputy or to the fire chief or the deputy fire chief? Is that the role? What's the role that we're talking about?
That's our support firefighter role, who works part-time, 5 hours a day.
One more. And then the report was really great. I think I was hoping for like a little bit more detail maybe or guidance in the report. I mean, I know our chief and deputy chief are already doing a lot of the things that is in this report are already being implemented. And they're doing a great job. But like things like, so you need to work on recruitment, and it's not just an Essex issue, it's a province issue, it's a Canada-wide issue on getting volunteer firefighters. Is there do you give recommendations on how like recruitment can happen, how to retain volunteer firefighters? Is that in, I read what was sent to us, and I'm not sure if that's everything, if there's another thick report that wasn't sent to us, but I didn't see anything like detailed like that. Like, is that included?
Existing recruitment process that the department utilizes now is an excellent recruitment process. I think from our perspective, it's about moving forward and being strategic in long-term planning to ensure that as things change, you're meeting those obligations that come forward because of a reduced commitment of people volunteering within the service.
Just to follow up with that and just a statement, I'm wondering if it's something that we can start with like an auxiliary firefighter. I know we're hiring 12 new recruits, but maybe because we do know that we have a retiring out fire department and people come and go, maybe we need to start some kind of auxiliary fire department where they're not yet on the volunteers, but maybe they can sit in on some training or they can come in and talk with the guys just to get them already in the door. And these could be young students maybe, or even college kids who aren't yet there. I think maybe we need to start looking at a program like that where we invite people in and let them know what it's about before they commit and do a full training. But that was just a comment, but thank you very much for everything.
Councilor McGuire Blaze, I like your idea about the dual role of admin assistant and firefighter. I'm not sure if that's something we can ever check out in the future, but it does seem like a good idea. I think that all of the recommendations will come back with their own separate reports, or during budget. I do have a couple questions myself. Are we alerted and put on notice when county EMS are in code red and code black so that we are kind of on standby? That's my first question, please.
Mayor Bondi, yes, we get an email from Deputy Chief Ryan LeMay that they're in code red or black.
Thank you. And when we relocate Fire Station 3, I'm going to be really frank and honest. I haven't been convinced that Roseboro is the best location. So I really need, are we going to have a report that, suggests that area, and the report will say the pros and cons of that area? And will the report also show other areas that were investigated with pros and cons? Like, I think it's going to be contentious, so we need to have defendable information. So what are the next steps on selecting that location, please?
Report to council with pros and cons why that would be the best location. In the master fire plan, I did identify a couple potential locations, and I think there was some notes spoke to it. I don't know if you want to speak to it, Chris, on why Lumex determined it was the best location.
So in the report itself, Mayor, we did put some observations in there for the other sites. So we looked at 3 potential sites that were there, and some of their shortfalls and some of the pluses for the Roseboro site. Off the top of my head, there were things that had to do with accessibility and the size of the lots and ensuring that firefighters could get in and out of different locations in a quick and expeditious manner, and ensuring that the site was large enough to meet the current and future needs of the fire service. That's why, after reviewing a number of different sites, we identified this site as the most viable for the current and future growth of this community.
That Fire Station 3 and Fire Station 1 have basically the same amount of calls. I know that the Fire Master Plan has a lot of dollars and cents in it, but since I've been on council, we've done Fire Station 1, Fire Station 2. So I know Fire Station 3 is ready and the calls are there. The calls support having a new station. So I think Deputy Mayor Shepley has one further comment, and then I will look for a motion to receive the presentation.
Mayor Bonnie, I'm kind of piggybacking right off of what you were saying. One of the questions I did have, I mean, I'm looking at, I'm not sure what the page number is, but this is the fire areas and it shows the amount of areas that the enormous area of Fire Station 3. Like, it just seems like, did we look at that area? Like, it seems like they're doing a much broader area than the other 2 and 1. Not that anybody's not doing their fair share. It just seems like such an enormous area for them to be looking after. And I really am looking forward to taking care of that Fire Station 3. I just wondered if there was any thought considered when this was done about the layout of the coverage for each department. If maybe Station 2 could take up some of that slack overlapping into 3 so that they could be more to the south. Because it just seems like they're doing a much larger area, in my opinion.
Yeah, Station 3 does a very large area. They do all Ward 3 and Ward 4. Just note, like, on any kind of structural fire response or any response, they normally upgrade right away and call Station 2 if it's close to that border. Station 3 is pretty quick to get out to that edge of the Station 2 response area. But yeah, we can look at that. We'll look at the call volumes. Obviously, we monitor the call volumes all the time. So if it's something that's determined we need to look at that, we can look at that response area. But right now, during the master fire planning, Lumex deemed it to be sufficient. So, but it's something we definitely monitor on a regular basis.
Thank you for the report. Just had a quick question on one of the recommendations in terms of partnering potentially with fitness centers for health and wellness of our firefighters, which I think is a great idea. We're going through right now with recruitment, and part of that recruitment is they have to meet some minimum physical testing. Have you seen across the province of that once you become a firefighter, are they looking at set a standard that they must maintain in terms of physical fitness? Like, I think it's a great idea and we would like them to maintain that, but I don't know if there's a standard coming out.
So through you, Mayor, the province has a variety of practices that are recognized, and certainly from the perspective of ensuring that you have an ongoing standard is a very positive thing to recommend. Most fire services have an entry level status, whether that's the candidate physical aptitude testing or whatever your local municipality is doing for physical aptitude testing. Some departments do review it periodically to see whether they're keeping up with it. Other departments, you do it once coming in the door and you don't do it again for 50 years, which just doesn't meet, personally, it doesn't meet the right type of standard we should be practicing in terms of health and wellness. When we talk about health and wellness, whether it's mental health and wellness or physical health and wellness, it's something that should be considered for sure.
For a motion that we receive the presentation entitled Community Risk Assessment and Fire Master Plan be received and adopted as presented. Looking for a mover and a seconder. Deputy Mayor Shepley, Councillor Hammond. Any further questions? All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Looking for a mover and a seconder that we adjourn this meeting. Counselor McGuire Blaze, Counselor Garen, all in favor? Thank you.